federal state legislation or not. Done, you go on. What the Roberts Court is doing is trying to reshape constitutional doctrine, and constitutional doctrine lives beyond the next case. And so when the Roberts Court goes out of its way to try to establish a new basis for state sovereignty, namely on the equal dignity of states, it has put forward a doctrinal premise that's very strong. Now, what did the Rehnquist Court do? The Rehnquist Court attempted to create a realm of immunity for the state from the federal government in a case called National League of Cities. But National League of Cities was overturned by Garcia, and that went. What else did the Rehnquist then Court do? Well, it had two cases left over, one called New York versus the United States, and one called Prince versus the United States. And the holdings on each of those cases essentially is the federal government cannot grab the state legislative process by the lapels and say, pass this. It cannot grab a state executive official, a police officer, an officer in the executive branch and say, you go enforce federal law. That's not much. That's not much. It still leaves the federal government wide range to supplant state law through federal legislation. What the Roberts Court is doing is moving doctrinally to expand the area of state independence rather than a particular case where the state law wins or loses under preemption. It expands the area. Look what it did in the Sebelius case. True, Roberts, he allowed Obamacare to go forward on the taxing, and there's a lot of question whether that was rational or not. But he moved the commerce power doctrinally forward, where Congress cannot regulate something that does not yet exist. Perfect logic. He moved the necessary and proper clause forward, saying that the connection between the means and the ends truly must be plainly adapted, not just rational basis. He moved the spending power closer, namely that regulations of the spending power cannot go too far. These are revolutionary doctrinal changes, each of which redounds to the area of state independence. The states may lose on preemption cases, so they're losing these little battles. But Roberts is hoping to win the big war, which is carving out an area where they are free to legislate as they want.
I don't have a whole lot to say in response to that. I do probably disagree. We probably disagree on the importance of the preemption cases. I mean, because I think these are cases that Roberts cares a lot about, but not because of preemption doctrine. I think many of them conjure up tort reform, and I think he's committed to tort reform. Again, I think that this is what happens in any political coalition, any ideology, right? You have different issues that you care about and prioritize. And I think Roberts comes out of a generation and out of a time of conservative political thought that is different than the time that O'Connor and Rehnquist came out of. And I think he was appointed in part post 9/11, he and Oviedo, to support executive power. And I see this as supporting the administrative state to a certain extent, and an effort to push tort reform forward. I'm not saying that it's legitimate or not, but I think these cases are important to him, and that's why I think he thinks less about protecting state police powers, because most of the time we're talking about the preemption of some area of the law that has traditionally been regulated by the states, or the state police power itself. And I think if one is really a states' rights advocate, you have to be troubled by that, even if you like the outcome. Now, I agree with Professor Forte that I think Roberts is interested in moving doctrinal law. I'm not sure the Rehnquist Court cases are as thin as he suggests, but I do think the Roberts Court is. But this is sort of Roberts' MO generally. He moves very incrementally, and I think kind of has an end game, and he's playing for the long haul. The question there is, though, that when you're talking about thin majorities in a lot of these cases, 5-4, the extent to which that is possible, or how easily it could be reversed in a relatively short order, although apparently Justice Ginsburg has no intention of retiring during Obama's presidency. And finally, on the necessary and proper point, I think that's an area of the law that's kind of a little muddled, but I don't see Roberts' holding in the Sebelius case as really overcoming Justice Breyer's holding in a case called Bond a couple years ago, in which, my God, he takes Chief Justice Marshall's view of the necessary and proper clause in McCulloch v. Maryland, and just drives, just crowbars it open, I think. So there's a little disagreement there, but I think if one believes in states' rights, I don't think the Rehnquist Court decisions are in danger of being overruled at this point, and they will be advanced, but I think it'll be very incrementally, very incremental.
All right, can we have a round of applause for our now we have 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll go ahead and have a break until we're ready to go to class. So, anyone have a question?
State sovereignty doesn't have you on the edge of your seat.
I have a question for Professor Pickle. Someone was just curious why you don't have Scalia on the why did you choose Roberts, Alito?
Well, because Roberts and Alito replaced O'Connor and Rehnquist, and so when you're looking at the federalism cases, that's the key shift. And also when you're looking at the narrow cases, although I think that going back to the narrowness issue, all of the justices who were on the court prior to Roberts and stayed on the court, everybody but Rehnquist and O'Connor, their voting behavior changed in these cases. They're all voting much more narrowly, except for one justice, and that's Justice Thomas. He continues to vote in big, broad swaths. But Scalia, I don't think Scalia is a committed Federalist either. You really only have one on the court, in my view, Thomas. I think Kennedy, it just depends on who he thinks he's going to please with his opinion, or who his clerks are that term.
How many of you know of the case of Shelby County? How many have heard of it on the news? Okay, this is the first time for most of you that you've heard of this case, right? Of the Voting Rights Act, is that correct? How many of you not heard of it? How many of you are awake? So this case that I talked about the equal dignity, of the equal sovereignty, sort of brings an equal protection clause into the structure of the federal government, so that states cannot be prejudiced one against the other by the federal government, absent a compelling federal government purpose. I think that's the doctrine he's trying to push into this. What that does is, does it leave any major area of state sovereignty free for federal regulation? Only in the sense that what it does is it tells to the federal government, you cannot pick and choose among the states. You have to pass a general piece of legislation. Why is that good? Because it's harder to get a majority on a piece of legislation that's going to constrict all the states than it is on constricting 6 of them. So the political process, which Roberts really relies upon, I think, to advance freedom in the country, the political process will protect the states by preventing major swaths of federal legislation because they can no longer pick on a few states here and there. Why do I say he relies on the political process? Well, let's take, for example, the Sebelius case. Roberts, as you may know, they had a 5-4 vote to strike down Obamacare, the whole thing. It was not severable. The whole thing was going to go below the waves. And Roberts pulled out at the end from the 5-person majority and said, yeah, I agree, they can't get there through the Commerce Clause because you can't regulate something that's not something. You haven't bought anything, you're not in the market. They can't use the spending clause that goes too far. They can't use the necessary and proper clause. They can't. That doesn't work at all. But they can use the taxing power, even though everyone said it wasn't a tax. You can use the taxing power. The day after the decision came out saying, well, this penalty for those who don't buy insurance, it's not really a penalty, even though it's a penalty in the law, it's a tax. And President Obama says, not a tax. Not a tax. No, that's not a tax. It's not a tax. So why did Roberts do that? I think Roberts did that because tax is the third rail of American politics. And he said, and he thought, you know, that the chances of this legislation being struck down or being modified, you had a greater chance in the political process when the only read to hang on it is, I'm going to tax you, right? They can't say, oh, it's part of commerce. They can't say necessary and proper. People don't understand that. But they understand taxes. So I think that's why he decided to kick that into the political process. So this similar tactic here is, by treating all the states equally, the federal government has less of a lever to pass intrusive legislation that affects more than a handful of states. Yes. Oh, sorry, Sarah, we got a question? We actually have one.
Doesn't the doctrinal approach kind of imply that you're enumerating the powers that are, by definition, the 10th Amendment unenumerated, and by kind of limiting what the state's rights are by having this exclusive area of competence as opposed to those that are not prohibited or delegated to the United States or prohibited by the states reserved to the states respectively? Aren't you kind of defining that by, in a way, limiting it when they use the doctrinal approach?
30 seconds.
That's a perceptive question. I don't know whether all of you got that, but that's a very nice perceptive question. The question suggests, by creating an area that the states are now free to legislate on, haven't you reversed the Constitution? The Constitution said originally, the federal government has these powers, everything else goes to the states. Now, if you just create an island, an oasis, from what the federal government does, you reversed it. You say the states are free in this area, and the federal government can do everything else. I haven't thought about that. I think that's very perceptive. I don't have an answer, except to say, nice job.
Good work, Sam. Thanks everyone for coming today, and please like us on Facebook. It's Northern Illinois University Federalist Society, and add us on the Twin page. And we're going to have our next event in 2 weeks from today. It's going to be rated to be a debate on whether polygraphic evidence should be admissible in court. There will be a live demonstration, so it should be a great event. And I'll come out. Thanks.
It's probably the guy with the camera. He's probably still here. I have been.